Hi guys, welcome back to Distillery. Today we're going to talk about what we use to do all of our brewing and fermenting in, and that is behind me here, and they are our 750 litre fermenters. Now these fermenters are similar to what you'd find in a brewery in particular. They're not so common in small batch distilleries such as ourselves. As I mentioned the other day, a lot of these distilleries don't necessarily make their own alcohol, but we are brewing, fermenting and distilling everything in-house. So we need a system like this. So behind me here you can see, as I said, they're 750 litres fermenters. That's what we use and match our still sizing, and they're a glycol cooled system. So as that yeast we spoke about the other day, it consumes that sugar. It naturally produces that CO2, the ethanol, which is the good stuff, but it'll also create a lot of heat. And as we mentioned as well, that yeast needs specific requirements for it to thrive. It doesn't like getting too hot. So you need to find a way of cooling your fermenter or keeping it at a consistent temperature. So as you can see on ours, as I said, these have nice, lovely stainless steel jackets on the outside. This is the internal tank up here. That internal tank, it follows that diameter down to the bottom. That is where the fermenting happens in there. The outside here is insulated, has a large foam insulation layer, and it also has a glycol jacket in there as well. This has a temperature sensor in the fermenter itself, and when the fermenter gets too hot, as I said, 25 degrees for our whiskey, 27, 28 degrees for other products like rum. Once it gets that 27 degrees, a valve will open automatically and flow cooled glycol fluid through the outside of that jacket to cool the fermenter down. And then once it gets back down to below a set temperature, it'll actually turn itself off and allow the fermenter to stay nice and warm. The insulation does its part as well. It's actually a warming layer as well. So when it does fermentation start to slow down, it actually keeps that warmth in that tank to help proceed and prolong the fermentation. Now how we control all this, if you look over here on my right, we have our 3-phase glycol chiller, which is up on the tank, on top of its tank. Down below it is a 500 litre glycol tank. Now at the moment, we have an electronic control system on there using PIDs to actually control all the temperatures. Now, this is pretty serious equipment. So if you don't have access to something like this, or you're looking at doing it on a smaller scale, potentially at home, there are a few classic tricks and tips to help keep your fermenters cool. Wrapping them in a wet towel is one of the great ways, and even putting your fermenter in a small bucket. So sit your fermenter down, keep water in that bucket and dip your towel down into it so it wicks the water up the side of your fermenter. That'll help keep your fermenter cool at home. Now insulating them, if it's cold, wrap them in a blanket. There's plenty of heat mats and heat bands and things like that that you can plug in to keep your fermenters warm, or find the most consistent temperature spot in your house. Now working with stainless steel is great. We actually have to keep it all clean and all very, very shiny when we work with it, and of course sterile. So brewing something or fermenting something in there does create a lot of krausen or some foam at the top, and we of course have to clean them at the end. Now on the arm that runs up the side here, it's actually running our air locks on them at the moment, but this arm here is actually also goes into the side of the neck and has what is called a spray ball on there. Now we're going to talk about a very important piece of equipment in the distillery in a minute, which is called our CIP, or our clean in place system. And that machine pumps high temperature on caustic or acidic fluids into the tank through that spray ball to actually clean the inside of those tanks for us. So we'll talk more about that later. We're going to move on now. Basically, once our ferments have sat in there for about 14 days or 10 days, depending on what we're fermenting, once that fermentation is finished and it's consumed, the yeast has consumed all the sugar, we actually pump it across to our still. Righto, we've moved over to our stills. Now here at Critters Distillery, we have 2 stills. They are modular stills, and they are 8-plate bubble cap column stills. Now if you can say 8-plate bubble cap column still 5 times after 5 of our vodkas, you're doing a lot better than I am. But these column stills are all modular. Allows us to produce a lot of different products through these pieces of equipment. Electrically heated, we have 6 elements in our large still. They are 3-phase elements for us. So there's 6 of them in there, and we can control each element individually as far as amperage goes to provide different temperatures in the still. But each one of these windows, a lot of people ask us, what do the windows do? Well, the windows don't do much other than the fact that they give us a view of what's directly happening in the column. Each plate, where the clamps are, there is a copper plate, and these plates contain bubble caps. And effectively what happens is we have that hot alcoholic vapor that we heat up down here. It rises up this column it'll hit the underside of one of these plates. It'll condense back into a liquid and it'll fall down onto the plate below it. That plate will then flood, and by flood we mean it'll create a bath of about inch deep alcohol, and there is a vapour path through that alcohol where subsequent alcoholic vapours will pass. So effectively, the subsequent alcohol vapours are going to get passed through a bath of high proof alcohol to condense them, recondense them, and keep any impurities down here in the still. So being 8 plates, 1 molecule of alcohol is distilled and redistilled roughly 800 to 900 times before it reaches this top of our still. Now up the very top of our still we have our deflagrator, which is a reflux condenser. We can control the water flow through that top condenser to basically determine what type of alcohol or what temperature alcohol falls back down into our column. That allows us to physically work closely to remove certain types of alcohol. Previously we mentioned things like acetone, methanol and rubbing alcohol. Well, those types of alcohols, we call them lighter alcohols. They boil at a lower temperature than ethanol. So you're doing it in batch by batch by batch, and controlling that reflux condenser at the top, we can actually control what type of alcohol we remove from our fermented material and either discard them or collect them separately. So over here you can follow the path of the alcoholic vapours. They rise up the column, past the deflagrator, come across the top of the still, through and down to what we call a product condenser. This is another condenser here. It actually runs flat out. We don't control the water temperature in that one, and basically recondenses the final alcoholic vapours down into a liquid, where we collect it out this spout here and into a stainless steel drum. Now this still here is our stripping still, it's our big one. Works pretty hard. Sometimes we actually remove those copper plates from that still as well, depending on what products we're stripping or what type of alcohol we're trying to produce. So for example, our stripping still of our vodkas and our gins, we actually use all 8 plates in that still. In our rums and whiskies, we take all of the plates out and we act as a pot still. White rum, we actually leave some of those plates in there. We leave 4 plates in there just to strip a bit more of that flavour out. Moving over to our little still, this is our little gin still. It's set up as a gin still at the moment. Again, it's an 8-plate bubble cap column still. Once we've collected all of our alcohol from our big still, usually we do that for our white spirits over 92 to 93% ABV. Water that back down to 40% and we place it in our small still and we double distill it. Again, 8-plate bubble caps, deflagrator at the top. It is set up with our gin basket at the moment, where we can vapor infuse some of our botanicals into the alcohol to create gins and certain flavours. But basically it's just a mini version of the big one. Our element control system, it can control all the elements in our stills. Each one of the elements has a dial here and an amperage meter, which we can effectively run through and control how many amps we are putting into the liquid in the still. That allows us to get very, very accurate and very, very close with what we want to control in there, how warm we want that to be, how quickly we can heat things up or how slowly we can heat things up. Because sometimes heating things up low and slow, is better than doing a fast distillation run. It is a rather expensive piece of equipment, these ones, and they were custom designed and built specifically for us to meet our requirements. Moving over to our lab area, it's not a very big one for us, but it does everything we need to do. This little area just houses all of our lab equipment as far as for testing alcohol goes. As you can see, we've got lots of stainless buckets, we have measuring buckets, we have demijongs and glass funnels. We also have all of our important test equipment over here. Now here is one of our small Anton par, it's an Easy Dens. It tests for us the sugar content in our worts. So before we put any yeast into it, or just right before we put yeast into it, we actually take a sample of the wort and then we pump it through this and it'll tell us its specific gravity. So our specific gravity start up around 1.075 and they'll finish around 0.977. Very fine-tuned pieces of glass equipment, also very, very expensive. These ones here, again, they are effectively analog versions of our Easy Dens. They're used to calibrate the Easy Dens. So these, again, you drop them into a sample of the liquid and they'll float to a specific height depending on the specific gravity of the liquid. They are fully calibrated and certified, these ones. As part of a commercial distillery, we are required to keep these in-house. We also have calibrated 0.5 of a degree accurate thermometers. Again, you can see a calibration number on the top there. They are calibrated every 12 months to 0.5 of a degree. One of my favourite pieces of equipment in the distillery is our large glass alcoholometers. These are again required by the ATO. Testing of alcohol, they are accurate to 0.2%. Depending on what temperature the alcohol is that you're testing will depend on how far they sink. So you have to calibrate them back or certify them back to 20 degrees. When we have this, we also have an Anton Pass Snap 41 in the distillery. It is a digital version of our glass alcoholometer and it automatically temperature corrects. So it makes for sampling a lot quicker than doing this, than following the practical alcohol tables and testing back to 20 degrees. We also have our certified scales. So we have a small benchtop scale here for lighter products, and then we have our larger scale down on the floor here. As you can see, it's got half a bag of sugar on it. We'll also keep in stock a large measuring device, which goes into our large stainless steel drums. All of our drums are calibrated and certified for tare weights. So we have to weigh those drums before we put anything in them or we take anything out. We dip them as well for depth, and we test the alcohol content. A lot of these things are required by the ATO for our excise tax reasons. So this equipment here, this is what I mentioned earlier, it's called our CIP machine. Now that stands for clean in place. All this machine does for us is literally clean the insides of our fermenters and our still. How it does that, it has 2 tanks and a bunch of different valves and a pump that is independent of anything else in the distillery. Effectively, we connect hoses up to here and down here at the bottom to the fermenter at certain points. As I mentioned, one's got that racking arm at the top to one of these, which is a spray ball. This is a ball that sits inside the fermenter and it spins. As you can see, it's got various slots and holes in it. So it'll spray whatever fluid we pump through it, all through that fermenter. It has the ability to heat one tank. So the tank on the right-hand side is able to be heated. We heat that to roughly about 75 degrees. Not too hot, keeping it safe to work with, but at the same time making sure whatever the alkaline or acid we put in that makes it very effective at a warmer temperature. And then we have usually a cold tank over here for sterilisation. This one, literally we hold sterilising chemical in there, literally, which is a no rinse sterilising chemical, but look, at the still at the end of the day, we rinse all of our chemicals out of our tanks to make sure they're clean before we do anything with them. Very important piece of machinery though, it is quite dangerous. As I said, we are pumping warm caustic or acidic material around the distillery in these things, not to be used lightly. Lots of different valves, and there is a saying called walk the line, which means you ensure that where you're pumping from goes into the pump, comes back out and goes to the right place. This is one of my favourite little guys in the distillery. It's our mobile pump stand. Basically, you can wheel it around the distillery in all sorts of various different locations with short hoses, long hoses to basically extract or push fluids through the distillery. It is a variable speed pump, so we can change how fast we can pump things, and it is able to be up to over 110 degrees of fluid. So a very handy piece of equipment. It's probably one of the last pieces of equipment that you'd think you might need, particularly when you're starting to deal with larger volumes. You have to look at how you're going to move them safely through a distillery. So these are all part of actually making the alcohol. All the equipment we've just discussed is part of how we make what we need to physically make the alcohol. We're traditional here, we brew, ferment and distill. So if you've got any more questions or comments, please ask us down below. Hit that like and subscribe button for more content like this.